Hey everybody, Paul Vaillancourt here, back with another episode of Yes and Then What. Today, my guest is Elizabeth Mihelich, and I've known Elizabeth for quite a few years. We met back in the old iOS days, may she rest in peace, and I have just been a follower of hers ever since. And I think she's if I had to put it like really a fine point on it, the thing that I love about her is her bias towards action. She every time I see her on Instagram, it's always like, I'm doing this, I'm making this, I'm writing this, we're shooting this, bang, 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 bang. It's the action, the creativity, the let's do it sort of spirit is amazing in her, and she's involved in so many different things. She has so many different irons in the fire at the same time. And I think this is really a crucial thing that I think people need to do, especially improvisers. I think we really need to do this more. Our conversation was super interesting, fun, and wide-ranging, covering everything from her first job when she got to LA to work in the service industry, all the movies that she's written and directed and produced and acted in, all the way up to and including clairvoyant reading. So, if you want to get the whole spectrum of the experience, you're going to have to check out the interview. I think it was a pleasure to talk to her. I think you're going to have a pleasure. It's going to be a pleasure to listen to. So that's it. Without any further ado, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Elizabeth Mihelich. It's happening. Great. So, introduce yourself to the people at home, please.
Okay. Hello. I'm Elizabeth Mihelich. I was born and raised in Pueblo, Colorado. I've been in Los Angeles for a long time now. And I am your typical multi-hyphenate actor, writer, producer. I've worked in restaurants and hospitality for a long time, and I also do clairvoyant readings.
Fantastic. That's a really broad spectrum of things that I want to talk about today. So we'll just start at the beginning. So you came to LA to be an actress or an actor, like so many of us do, and we met originally at the IO West.
We did.
When you were taking classes and doing improv there. How long were you at the IO West before it closed down and stuff?
Before it went its way. I moved here in 2001. And then I was interning at Acme Talent and Literary as an intern, just to learn sort of how things went. And Jason Axon was the lit person I was working under. He said, "Hey, why don't you come check this place out? I think you would really love it, and you'd be great at it." So I went to IO West in 2001, and he was correct. Loved everything about it. Took the whole program. Then it was a 6-level program. And then after that, I got on to a Herald team. I was on assisted living for a while.
Okay.
A couple of things happened eventually, as they do. They rework improv teams. I got booted off the team. My coach was like, "I think you're the heart and soul of the team, but you're off."
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not it's us.
It was devastating. It was devastating.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So, and I'd spent so much time there. I interned at the theater to pay for classes. I was taking a bunch of classes, doing all the workshops on multiple teams. So it was 4 or 5 nights out of my life probably that I was at iOS. And so when that happened, I took a step back, kind of took a break from improv, and then eventually found my way back through Second City's Conservatory. So I auditioned for Groundlings and Second City at the same time. I got into both, but I was more attracted to Second City's Conservatory because they do the satire and the parody and the genre improv.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked that. So I did the full conservatory program where you you do a whole sketch show based on improv. You basically use improv to write sketch. So I did that in 2005. And then ended up on a grad group house team at Second City, and for a while on Tuesday nights, in 2008, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then toyed with the idea of coming back to IO West, auditioned for Herald teams a few times. Eventually got put on another Herald team. I got added to The Dilemma, which was an existing Herald team. And then that team got cut, and then, auditioned again. And then I was on DCT for a while, which was a DCT team. And then ended my reign there auditioned again, got put on a team called Nebraska, which was awesome. Loved that team. And then when the theater got reworked and reconfigured, they, you know, cleaned house and cut basically everything we got cut. And then was thinking about joining again. And then the theater went up in smoke and is no longer around.
Right, that's how that goes. Yeah, but that's a good long run. That's a lot of different twists and turns for sure. Let me go. I just want to go back and sort of touch on a couple things. So you said that when you first came here, you were working as an assistant in a literary agency.
Yeah.
What was that part of a plan? Was that sort of a premeditated thing, or was that the job that you fell into, or, you know, things happen all different kinds of ways?
Yeah. So in Colorado, when I was in college, there's this woman named Sue Coffey who runs a thing called the Hollywood Showcase. Mm-hmm. So I would drive from Greeley, Colorado to Denver, which is like an hour and a half away, to do these workshops. And the Hollywood Showcase was workshops where they would bring agents out from LA. We would do like a weekend long workshop with them with classes, and then they would give us feedback. So Adam Lieblein, who was one of the owners of Acme Talent Literary, was one of the people who came out and gave feedback. And so when I got here, I just wanted to be in that environment and to learn what I could of like how an agency works, like what is expected. Mm-hmm. And then, so I dropped off like a resume and just said, hey, I did this Hollywood Showcase. I know this thing. And then they just needed an intern in the lit department. So I ended up like working for them. But still kind of assisting, like occasionally I would stuff like the envelopes when they looked for roles, mm-hmm. you know, because it was back in the day before like electronic submissions.
Right, sure.
Literally stuff them in there. So I did that. And then that's also how I got my very first commercial agent, because Emily, the commercial agent there, loved me and we got along so well. And she was like, I'm just going to start sending you out. So it was like very useful. Yeah.
That's great. So it actually sort of shook out really, really well. And I think it's really interesting that you sort of wanted to do that deeper dive into the industry and sort of learn how the agency works. Because that's a part of the puzzle that when you're in acting school or you're an actor, you're doing plays, you're not thinking like, I wonder how an agency works. I mean, most people aren't. But I think that's really insightful. I'm going to sort of come back. I'm sure I'm going to come back to that. But also Kismet, that's how you met Jason Axon, who got you to the IO West. That's really interesting. And so you were on a few different house teams at IO and Second City. Fantastic. And then but along the way, you're still you know, a straight up actress, and you're auditioning for commercials and doing all that kind of stuff too. And so tell me about this. So what I've really seen you do most lately, mm-hmm. That's not really a sentence, but let's say it is. And what I've seen the most out of you lately is sort of you're producing and making these short films, which I think is super interesting. So talk to me about the transition from, was it at the same time that you're doing improv and doing that? Or was it sort of like, I'm kind of done with that stage, I'm going to move on to producing more? Tell me about that transition. I think that's super interesting.
It was actually born out of improv, because a couple of people I met at Second City's Conservatory, my friend Paul Lorette and Stacey Adamski, we worked really well together. And then I had a boyfriend at the time named Corey. We formed a group called Spec Comedy, which was like Stacey, Paul, Elizabeth, and Corey.
Oh, wow.
And we were like actively meeting and like writing sketches and talking about filming them. And then we did Paul moved to Las Vegas. So we did a few 48-hour film festivals together in Vegas, a couple of years in a row. Mm-hmm. Where we would drive to Vegas, we would, you know how they work. They like give you a genre, a line of dialogue, and something else that you have, a prop that you have to incorporate into a film. You have to have the whole thing made and turned in 48 hours. So we did that twice. A couple of our things won awards. So I learned a lot through that process. And then eventually we were like, if we can do this in 48 hours, why don't we just write something and make a real short film? Like, let's schedule it. Let's try to raise some money. Let's do it. So we made this really fun short called Just Like the Movies.
Right. Did really well for you. Won a bunch of awards.
That one did great. Yeah. And it was super fun. And this is how I link it back to improv too, because it's such a collaborative process. Like all four of us pitched ideas of what we wanted to do. And then it was born out of like one idea that I think I had, but then one of our members had an issue with like the subject matter or something. I think it was about an affair or something. And so through the process of like talking that through, we came up with the idea of like, what if it's a group of office members who get, instead of their monetary bonus at the end of the year, they get a subscription to like a Netflix-like subscription.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they start watching these movies, they take on the attributes of movies. So one guy becomes
super fun.
Yeah, super fun. Like I was a romantic comedy obsessed gal, and then one guy's obsessed with Brad Pitt, and so he just keeps like dressing like Brad Pitt's characters. And we had a film noir guy, so he started, talking in the film noir voice and like all that stuff. And then without the collaboration of improv, though, without that conversation, without everyone being willing to bend and say yes and, I don't know that we ever would have found that idea.
So great. So let's just, I just want to hang a lantern on this since it's improv focused. Yeah. So first, one of the things that really happened was that you met these sort of like-minded people through improv. That's really fun. I think that's a thing that people don't ordinarily take advantage of enough. Yeah. In improv is like, oh, we're all doing improv. There's something about us that's all drawn us all to this thing. Maybe that's a good thing we could capitalize on. And you did that. And then also just the simple process of yes and of like that was in the way that you did it. I think that's really great. I've worked with both kinds of people. I've worked with people who are improvisers and not improvisers, and it can be very different sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a totally different thing. And I just had a situation where like a project sort of imploded a little bit because I realized at the base of it is that we think of collaboration in a different way. Like we collaborate differently, and that's totally directly linked to my improv days.
And can you just sort of say what those differences were? Like what were your different interpretations of collaboration?
Yeah, it was like just a scenario where they had felt like I was trying to direct something on set when like, I think back to the moments of like, what would that have been? It was like a moment of me being like, hey, just that angle makes it look this way. And like other situations I've been on sets where like everyone's just like constantly pitching ideas or like saying things. And like that improv mind is more open to being like, oh, wait, that is a great idea, as opposed to a director being like, I'm the director and what I say goes, and like, don't you dare like try to like infiltrate my process.
I think that's a really great observation. I found that to be true in my own experience as well, where especially on my very first job in TV, I was like, what? We're all equal. And I totally got like hung up on a couple things where I was just like, well, no one's doing that. Well, I'll just do that. And like, that's somebody's job, man. I was like, okay. But I think that when you deal with people who are improvisers more, have that sort of spirit, it's a more flatter sort of hierarchy where it's kind of like anyone could say like, oh, hey, that light's kind of out of focus, or even though you're not the light guy or whatever.
Right.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, cool. So you sort of found that out. Okay. Yeah. And so you sort of got into this groove of making these shorts, but all different kinds. That sounds like a comedy, but you've also made some very dramatic ones.
Right. So after Just Like the Movies did really well, I also write. So I had a few scripts that I had written with the intention, one particularly called Partnering, that was like a ballroom romantic comedy movie. That I love ballroom and I love rom-coms. So I was like, I'm going to write something for myself that I can act in. So I wrote this feature, and then I kind of was like, I don't know how to schedule or budget a film in order to say, I need this amount of money for this feature. So I took a class at UCLA's extension program called the Art of Line Producing, which, the line producer is like, I equate them to like a project manager on like a construction job.
Right.
They kind of put all the pieces together. So I took that class. And then when I took that class, I had all this new knowledge and skills. And at the same time, my friend Gabrielle Stone had just written her first short film called It Happened Again Last Night. And she's like, hey, I just wrote this. I know you just finished your class. Will you help me do this? So I was like, okay, cool. So I line produced that short, and it went swimmingly well. And we had people that came from Arizona and Chicago and like worked on this short film for free. Everyone donated their time. I think we only spent like maybe $18,000 on it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was a 2-day weekend shoot. It was a hard hitting. Gabrielle loves drama. So she's always about the like heaviness. So it was about like domestic violence and like a woman, you know, deciding whether or not she wanted to step into like a same-sex relationship, all while letting go of an abusive heterosexual relationship. So we did that, went really well. And then I think after that, I just posted, or I saw a friend post, my friend Laurel Vale posted that she had written this short called What Metal Girls Are Into and was going to raise money for it. So I reached out and said, hey, I'm line producing now. Like, let me know if you want some help. I just did this short. It was awesome. And she's like, great, let me see if I can raise the money to afford you. And like, I'm not expensive. But it was also nice to have someone say like, hey, I know there's value in what you're doing.
Sure.
So let me see if I can pay you. So she did. She raised enough money. And then we went to Joshua Tree in December and did an overnight shoot for 5 days, which I do not recommend because it is very cold. And it was a very hard shoot, but it was like everything went well shoot wise. It was mostly just like weather struggles and like that sort of stuff. And then like
found out, sorry, I just want to sort of put a pin on this, but you sort of took this class and you found out, hey, I kind of like line producing, which I think is interesting. I think so many people, myself included, go through an evolution when they come to Los Angeles where they think, oh, I'm coming here for A, that's what I'm going to do. But then they have these different experiences and they find out that like show business is a lot of different things. You know, whether it be a writer or some people fall, oh, I love catering. They sort of open a catering business and they do that or what, you know, but there's all these different kinds of things. And so you now are line producing, which is, I think, sort of a real interesting choice because I think so many people like myself, when I hear you say line, I'm like, oh, that's something I have no idea about. I think you've really sort of, it's interesting to me because you're obviously a very creative person, and then line producing is like really brass tacks, numbers down the line and stuff. So I think it's interesting to have that sort of dichotomy of skills. Do you feel like that sort of made you a better line producer, or more someone easy to work with, maybe because you have that sort of creative side? You've been on the other side.
Yeah, I think it serves it, and it can be a disservice, I think, at sometimes too. It serves it because I do have that background of like, oh, okay, I know what went into the creativity of like creating this thing. So you have to like look at things, and like a line producer's job is also to go to the writer, the director, and say, look, we can't afford this, but here is a creative option of how I think we could fix it. Right. Or like, hey, this scene is exactly the same as this scene. I think we can lose one of them because it does the same thing. So your creativity helps you and serves you in that like manner. And then it can be a disservice in the sense of like, I've had to learn to like really step into my power of like, no, like of learning those moments where you have to step in and say, hey guys, we're losing our day and we're not going to complete this shoot. So here are your options. You can do this, or you can do this. Talk about it, but decide right now. And like, that's hard to do when you know like what the creativity is.
Sure.
You know, so it's like holding that balance of like, the business side of it. But I was a very good student growing up, a straight A student, really smart. My brain works in it can work in that like linear, like, oh, this leads to this, to this, to this, to this, which is a lot of line producing. And, you know, it's something that served me quite well, like in my hospitality career too, like waiting tables. It's like, you have to have that ability to like lay things out in your head that are happening like this and not lose track of all of them.
Yeah.
I'm just naturally good at that.
Yeah. That's awesome. So do you find that sort of to loop back around to improv for a second, do you find that you do that in improv scenes too? Like, I feel like I'm sort of have a little bit of that as well. And in a scene, I know that I'm oftentimes the organizer. There's like a bunch of stuff going on. I'm like, hold on a second, and try to sort of like, just put a little fence around it to make it like a thing rather than everything.
Yeah, I think I do that. Like, I definitely would always find myself being like the straight man, or like being like, okay, this needs to do this.
Right.
which is useful and helpful, but also like I definitely in improv would hold myself back of like, you'd have that impulse, but then my like logical brain would be like, no, though, that's gonna like set everything off, which it could have been a great thing, right? It could have like set everything off into like a whole different world.
Right. Yeah, I think it's definitely, as a logical person as well, it's sort of like that kind of like just letting it go, trying to sort of marry those two things in your performance, like as it gets rolling and all that kind of stuff. So you're line producing, you're writing, you're directing, you're acting, like just to sort of like put a point on it for the audience of this particular video, like how do you feel, or what do you think improv did for you in those respects? I mean, definitely sort of flattened the power dynamic in your mind, but would you find there's certain things from improv that you use in producing a short film?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think that just the basic like yes and, is really helpful in producing, because people respond more to positivity as opposed to like just a straight no.
Right.
But more of the presentation of like, yeah, we could do that, and there's also this other option. Yeah, I don't know. Never thought about that exactly.
No worries. And maybe it's none at all. That's totally fine too. Let me ask you another question, sort of based on a conversation we were having earlier this week. We were sort of messaging back and forth, like kicking around this idea. And I said, well, maybe it could be a short. And you said, well, I'm not sort of really hot on shorts right now. Can you but you've made a ton of those. So I think your sort of change of heart or sort of turn on that could be super informative. What's changed your mind about that?
Well, I mean, at this point, I've produced or line produced like 11 different shorts, I think. And they run the festival circuit. They've all gotten into great festivals. Most of them have won awards. People need a gut check as to like why you want to make a short film. Like, yeah, you could, but you just need to know your why. So is it because you want a proof of concept for something? Is it because you want like something that says, hey, look, I'm a director and I can do it. Here's what I did. Because it takes a lot of money, and it does take a lot of time to create something good. Mm-hmm. That can compete on the festival circuit. Because like now, I mean, well, right now we're in this weird pause where nobody's really doing anything anyway, or they're moving to like virtual festivals, which is great, but also devastating, because my favorite thing about producing these things is like listening to an audience respond to them and like seeing what lands and what doesn't, like the different things that hit. And it's like different every time.
Right.
So to lose that ability to sit with an audience it's great that it's virtual and it can get out there, but it is like that catch-22 of like, man, we're missing that. I lost the question.
So you're talking about your why. I think that's really interesting. That's something you mentioned earlier as well. And I think sort of let's just sort of land on that for a second. So you're saying that like when you're making a short or whatever, it's a hard process and it's a lot of work. So being clear on your why helps you in what way in your mind?
Being clear on your why helps you decide what kind of budget you want, mm-hmm. like what you need. Like if you're using this as a calling card as a director, you need it to look the best that it can. So you're going to have to rent like a Red camera. You're going to have to rent, an Arri Alexa, or you're going to have to invest in a gaffer and a crew and lighting rentals. Because if you're going to go out in the world and say, hire me as a director, but it looks really bad, no one's going to hire you as a director.
Right. No one cares if your budget was X, Y, or Z. They just care about what's on the screen and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're lucky and we're blessed now that like iPhones have this amazing like ability to look like, you can shoot in 4K on like an iPhone 11 now. So you can do that, you can use that, but you also still need a gaffer to look at lighting. Unless that's a knowledge that you have to like plug in all the elements. If you just want to do it for fun to get out there and make something, then sure, you can shoot a short film for $3. Right. Mark Duplass speaks about that a lot, of like, just get out there and do it.
For sure.
But those are probably things that you're going to use to like build your arsenal, to learn your lessons, to like get them in front of people, but you're probably not going to submit them to Sundance unless they end up being like brilliant,
Right.
Because it costs like $40 to $75 to submit your film to Sundance. So it's like not cheap at all.
So I've heard some people talk about short films and they don't, not that they don't believe in them, but they sort of see that it has sort of a limited life in the sense that like goes to a festival, but then where do you see it past that? I mean, now we have like sort of VOD, which is like, I guess people could get it that way, but it's like, if you make a feature, even like a short feature, it can go places. It can be, it can exist out and sort of make money or whatever afterwards. Do you feel any of that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Like, what do you do with it at the end? There are some distribution companies out there that like collect shorts, but like what Metal Girls are into went to like over 150 festivals, horror festivals. It won a ton of awards. It was very successful. And then we got approached by like, you know, this company that I think wanted to package it in like a thing of horror shorts, but they would only pay like $500 for it or something crazy.
Wow.
And so the money of making money from shorts is not really there a lot anymore. There are certain avenues maybe, but I haven't seen it in any of the ones that I've done. And then it also gets difficult too, because like I'm in SAG. So I produce all of my shorts SAG if I can, because I think it's hypocritical to be in SAG and then make movies that don't use SAG actors. And it's great for short films because you can defer payment. You don't have to pay your actors, all that jazz. So you get this great pool of talent. But once you get paid like 1 cent for anything, that SAG contract kicks in. You have to go back and pay all the deferred rates to the SAG actors plus their pension and health. So if you get offered like $500, but we owe all of our SAG actors $5,000, you can't say yes to that deal.
Right, because it costs you $4,500 to package that thing.
Yeah, chances are you don't have it because you're an indie filmmaker who funded your project yourself.
Yeah.
You know? So it is definitely challenging, you know, and then your other option is just put it online and like let people see it.
Yeah.
Like Short of the Week is doing really great. Like they have really great content, but they don't accept everything either. So it's also like submitting to a festival, they're curating a specific need or a want or what they want to put out there. So it's not just going to be like a blanket, yeah, give it to us.
Right. So. They're curating it. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So yeah. So would you, if someone's sort of like now they're in the quarantine, they're sort of like, you know, getting all their marshaling their resources and they're like, when quarantine's over, I'm going to do this. Would you really sort of encourage them to make something that's more like a feature? Or
if
would
you can,
mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, like, you know, and also like I'm at the point too where like I've produced 11 short films. So now I'm at the point where like if I don't step into producing a feature, it starts to look like, what's wrong with you? Like, why can't you make that leap to the next thing? So it is also like a personal decision for me. And like my friend Gabrielle Stone, she and I work together all the time. We've now done 2 short films that I produced, she directed and wrote. And then, you know, our next goal is a feature film. But also in quarantine, her mom is Dee Wallace, who's the mom from E.T. and Cujo and all that.
Mm-hmm.
She asked Gabrielle to like help her make a project to keep her connected to her horror fans. And so Gabrielle called me and she's like, I know we said no more shorts, but, and I was like, but it's your mom.
Right, sure, right? It's your mom.
It's your mom. And we also had the challenge of how do we film something now, which has kind of ignited a new fun spark in me of the reminder that like you can do things on the cheap in a fun way if they're challenging you to come up with like creative solutions. I'm like talking myself in circles, I know. But you know, if you're now in quarantine and you are like getting your ducks in a row, if you have time, create a project that you can make yourself on the cheap, like write something with the elements that you have.
Right.
So like I was speaking to another girl who wrote a feature in quarantine. She's going to direct and produce it. And she's planning on making this feature film for $30,000, which is crazy. But she wrote it knowing she would film in her apartment, in the office that she has the like use of in her apartment building. She wrote the script with the things that she has. Also knowing that she has friends with camera equipment that she has spoken to that they will lend her. So if you write a script, write it for like the resources you have the ability to tap into already, because then you'll be like head and shoulders above the game. But if you're going to write like something set in outer space and you don't have access to a green screen or like a bunch of like special effects, like you're just shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. Well, I think that's really practical advice, especially nowadays. Like you said, people can shoot on their phones or whatever, but sort of keeping in mind the resources that you have and sort of writing towards that. And you can sort of really make $30,000 look like $60,000 or whatever. But that's great.
And maybe too, like recognizing like, okay, this isn't going to be a festival piece, but I'm going to put this web series, I'm going to break it into like small 2-minute bites, and then I'm going to post it on a TikTok channel and build an audience and start working on building your social media presence or things like that, so that when you move on to the bigger project, you have a built-in audience that will then donate to crowdfunding or will watch what you have down the pike, or some exec is going to be like, oh, they have like 15,000 followers, like we could trust them versus the person that has like 75.
Sure. And that's really swings around in a big way to what you were talking about, know your why. Like, why are you doing this? Like, you know that you want to make, showcase yourself as a director or to build your social media. That's a new piece of the puzzle that when we started out wasn't really a thing.
No, not at all. Right?
Now it's a major thing. I know some friends of mine have produced movies based on getting YouTubers with X amount of followers and starting that as like the seed of it and sort of building around that. So because they're basically considering that audience. And a lot of people go into auditions now, and I hear, not right now, but in the general now, and people will ask them, well, how many Instagram followers do you have? Or how many YouTube followers do you have? Where it didn't seem like that's really relevant, but it really is.
Insane. And I think we're also learning lessons now where you've seen things where like they built a movie around this YouTube star, and then when you get into filming, they can't hack it.
Right.
They can't carry a movie, or they can't do the acting, or so it's a balance for sure. And like, the pendulum swung all the way this way, it's going to come back. But it is about riding the wave of like, what's going to serve me best.
Right.
Which is hard.
For sure. I mean, I think discovering that is part of our journey as an artist, is like, where do I want to go? What's my why? What's the best way for me to get that why? And sort of that serves me. And I know we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to sort of just take a quick left turn here for a second and ask you about the clairvoyant readings that you do. How in the world did you start doing that? Like, that's so fascinating. That's like, and you say it so casually, you're like, well, I produce and I do this and I do clairvoyant readings. Like, to me, like, that's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So how did you get into that? Tell me all about it.
Okay, in a nutshell. So, it took me a while to get to a place where I could be like, yeah, let's talk about this publicly. Because it is weird and it's fun. But basically, I was raised Catholic, all that jazz. So this was nothing that was in my arsenal. But growing up in high school, we were constantly playing with tarot cards, messing around with the Ouija board. So it's always been there for me. Mm-hmm. And then I started to get really, really afraid of ghosts, but then would watch Ghost Hunters like nonstop by myself at night and be like, what is this thing? And so a friend was like, hey, I'm going to this like 1-day how to be psychic workshop with this woman named Marilyn Aloria. So we went to this like day workshop, and we did these fun things where you would partner up, say, and like I would think about a time that I had a bad injury while looking at this flower, putting it all into this flower, and then the other person would just sit and like look at the flower and just think or say like, I'm getting like a pain in an ankle, or, you just trust whatever comes to you, which is also very improv related though.
Right.
And then, so that was super fun. And like, we would be right. And I'd be like, oh my God, this is so cool. I believe everyone has the ability, you can teach it. So I did that. Then the same woman taught a 6-month course in her house. We'd go to her house once a month. She would lecture on all the different types of modalities of psychicness: clairsentient, clairaudient, clairvoyant, mediumship, empathic. And then each month we would get these assignments and a partner, and we'd have to go do something. So like one time, my friend Naomi and I think maybe it was like mediumship or feeling, we went to the Comedy Store and got to sit in the Comedy Store in the middle of the day and just like feel what came to us and see if anybody was there, or like, and then we would just journal and jot it down. And then, you know, after we went and talked to like the person that ran the Comedy Store and said, okay, these are the things that came up. And they would be like, oh, absolutely. That's probably this person, or that's probably this. So fun things like that, that sort of just blow it up. And then the way I found to clairvoyancy was, there's a school in Chicago called Envision that teaches clairvoyancy. And so they did their first ever like online clairvoyant program. So we would meet online, they would lecture on a Saturday, and then we would practice like reading. And then I would have to call into the school where they were doing active in-person readings twice a week and participate in watching someone do a reading, or just sitting like in a meditation, sort of like paying attention to what I was seeing and like while they were doing it. So it was literally just practice. And like when I first started it, I was like, this isn't real. Like I'm just making up these images that I'm looking at with my third eye, right? And then the more I did it, the more I got validation from people that I was like, okay, this makes no sense to me, but like, this is what I'm getting. And they'd be like, oh my God, totally. And like, it resonates for them. It makes sense for them. So I don't read really like future stuff. I read energy and present time. So I can look at your energy of what you're holding right now and be like, this is what's blocking you, or like, this is what this looks like. And then also can figure out if it's someone else's energy that's in your space, or if it's your own. And like kind of help release those energies if they're not their own. It sounds
That's
so
awesome.
good.
That's
Just talk about it.
That's great. And helping people, and that's awesome. Yeah. So I think it's so interesting that it's something that people can learn. I would never guess that.
Yeah, I think everybody has the ability to do it. It's just whether or not you want to open it up. And then, you know, I also learned great lessons of like, you can set boundaries, because like I was terrified of ghosts. So now I have a boundary. Like I don't see dead people. I don't see ghosts. They know they're not allowed here. Like my house is set up that way. You can shut that down. Because you're in charge of your own space. You're in charge of your own energy. So even if someone showed up to you and you were like, oh, okay, you gotta go. Like they have to listen to you. So like learning those things from teachers was also super helpful.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an absolute delight. To say the least, a wide-ranging conversation.
Oh.
It was so great talking to you, catching up.
True.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, you know.